I am Alicia Walls, Chief Operating Officer of the Washington County Community Foundation, and would like to welcome you to the second session of our 2023 Nonprofit Leadership and Engagement Series, Governing Documents Review. A modest title for sure, but I have a feeling this is going to be a thrill ride for all of you who really appreciate order and structure in your organizations. So with us today is a phenomenal local authority on the subject, Barbara A. Graham. Barbara is the senior member of Peacock Keller's school law group and a member of its employment law group. She performed both her undergraduate and graduate work at the University of Pittsburgh, graduating magna cum laude with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science in 1980. Her Juris Doctorate is from its School of Law, which followed in 1983. In addition to maintaining memberships in both the Pennsylvania and Washington County Bar Associations, Barbara also remains active in the Pennsylvania School Board Solicitors Association, having served as its president in 1996, and she frequently presents to school board members and solicitors. Barbara has also been a contributing editor to various publications issued by the Pennsylvania School Boards Association. In 2013, she received the President's Award for Distinguished Career Achievement from the Solicitors Association in recognition for her longstanding service and commitment to the organization, as well as fellow solicitors. And we are very fortunate to have Barbara as secretary for the WCCF Board of Trustees. Before I turn things over to Barb, I do have just a few housekeeping items. So firstly, this session is being recorded. The recording and related handouts will be posted to the WCCF website for your future reference. And to respect both our presenter and everyone participating in the session, please keep your mic on mute and make use of the chat feature if you have a comment or question. Questions are welcome at any time, but there will be an opportunity for Q&A after the presentation. Finally, we do encourage you to share your name and organization when posing your question. Sometimes it can be hard to tell who you are from your Zoom screen name, so we'd appreciate that little detail. So with that, I think we're ready to get started. And Barb, the floor is yours. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now.
Thank you, Alicia, and welcome everybody. We are doing this because I am paid to be a stickler for detail when it comes to documents and order and organizations. And I have learned through my career, which is, as you well know, is rather long from that lead in, that oftentimes my clients and organizations that they work with or that I work with do a really good job of dealing with the really big issues, but then they inadvertently, almost always it's inadvertent, drop the ball on some of the lesser items that are really commonsensical. And if they thought about them, they wouldn't drop the ball. It's just they're perhaps so mundane or so common sense that people forget about them and then they don't get done, and sometimes problems arise. So the purpose of this conversation, and I do want it to be a conversation, as Alicia said, there will be time to talk at the end, is to try to remind all of you, and I know from looking at the list of participants, I know that we have a variety of organizations here who I would bet have done many things quite right. And I'm very much hoping that this is just boring to you because I'm telling you things you've already done and you're already known, and that you don't need any more guidance from me, and that would be fabulous. But part of this is to, again, remind everybody we need to make sure we're doing things as legally correctly and timely as possible so we can maintain our tax exempt status and our funding stream. As you all know, apart from the fact that we don't ever want any of you to be challenged in terms of what you or your boards are doing in terms of how you're operating your organizations from a legal perspective, you also want to be able to go out to the WCCF or other funding sources and ask for money in your fundraising efforts, ask for grants. And a lot of times you have to have these documents ready and you have to give them a whole lot of information. You don't want to be scrambling because, as you well know, sometimes these opportunities arise and the deadlines come upon you more quickly than you would like. And depending on the size of your organization, you may not have a lot of staff members available to scurry quickly and create documents. Plus, there is the fact that creating documents after the fact creates its own problems. Okay, so let's go here. You've all found articles of incorporation with Pennsylvania. just a reminder, this comes later, but just a reminder that you are obligated to annually file a document indicating you're still operating and indicate whether or not there have been any changes in your board members. It's a re-registration form, so make sure you're doing that, which indicates if you've changed officers, anything like that. You are all at the time you were creating your organizations, you developed bylaws. As you know, you do not have to file bylaws with anybody, and they can be amended from time to time. But I always urge people to take at least an annual review of their bylaws to see if the bylaws are accurately reflecting what your current mission statement is. I'm involved in an organization that started out in, I believe it was 2002, with a particular mission statement, and it's morphed a bit for legitimate and appropriate reasons that are still a charitable purpose reason, but we needed to amend the bylaws to reflect the change in our mission. Make sure those bylaws are also written to be consistent with the way you're operating. Either you operate consistently with the bylaws, is what I'm saying, or amend those bylaws. For example, if you have bylaws that say you're going to meet quarterly, your board of directors is going to meet quarterly, then please meet quarterly. If you're not meeting quarterly because of the unavailability of board members or the fact that you don't need to conduct business that frequently, again, that's the call of your organization. But if you're not doing that, amend the bylaws so that you're not, per your bylaws, under an obligation to meet quarterly. You can say a minimum of twice a year or something like that. You can always, and your bylaws should, you can always have special meetings in the interim if you need to. Again, what I'm suggesting is just make sure that your bylaws are consistent with the way you're operating. So you either amend the bylaws or you amend the way you're operating to be consistent with the bylaws, okay? Your bylaws will also should, and I believe they probably all do, indicate how you amend them. So make sure when you're amending the bylaws that you're amending them the way the bylaws say you're allowed to amend them. For example, we all communicate by email all the time now. You can send out draft amendments to bylaws, but if your bylaws require, and they usually do, and they frankly should require a meeting with a vote by a majority of your board members or a majority of the quorum, then you have to have a meeting. You can have a Zoom meeting to do it. There's no reason why you couldn't, but you can't just say, hey, everybody, let me know if these bylaws are okay. Everybody emails back, yeah, that's fine. And you have amended bylaws. Because again, you're not operating consistent with your bylaws. And again, something as significant for an organization as amending the bylaws should always indicate that there was a meeting of the board of directors to amend the bylaws, okay? Simple, very simple, see what I meant? Very simple things, but if you don't think about them, you may run afoul, and you don't want to be in a situation where, again, you're asking a granting organization to give you money, and they say, let me see your bylaws, and then let me see your minutes, and your bylaws say you're going to meet 4 times a year, and you're going to have appropriate minutes, and here you met once a year, and you had a bunch of emails indicating the business that was taking place, okay? So just be careful. I always view this, I think the way you have to view it, and I think it's hard for organizations to do this, I think you have to step back and look at this as if you're a total stranger to your own organization and you're coming in fresh and you want to know what's going on. And so you look at the documents. A stranger who can read, frankly, should be able to understand what's going on by looking at your bylaws and then looking at the minutes that reflect what you've been doing consistent with the bylaws. And if those don't mesh, then you can fix them going forward. You all have in your articles of incorporation identified what the name of the organization was going to be, and you reserve that as an organization. However, some organizations, in addition to having your actual corporate name, have a name they like to operate under, because you might have a complicated name. It might be too long. You might have for example, we always say WCCF. That's obviously not our name, and we don't, on nothing formal do we ever say that. But if we wanted to actually use WCCF as our name, we would want to register it as a fictitious name in Pennsylvania. So we would be the Washington County Community Foundation doing business as WCCF, but you have to register it in Pennsylvania. You should register it in Pennsylvania. Now, fictitious name registration is qualitatively different than registering the name that you registered when you incorporated, because you reserve your corporate name, but you cannot in Pennsylvania reserve that fictitious name registration because it's not a separate entity. It's just nomenclature. And this is important because of confusion. You want all your documents, all your legal documents, all your minutes to have your actual corporate name. Don't want, they can also include, if you have a properly registered fictitious name, they can also, okay, thank you. They can also include that, but every document, every contract into which you enter should have your actual corporate name, not your registered fictitious name. I was mentioning to Alicia, and here's an easy example for why this is important. One of my clients wanted to enter into a partnership with a Washington County local profit organization. My nonprofit wanted to enter into a partnership with this profit. And so I was looking at the initial documents and I said to the other attorney, who's a very seasoned practitioner, very respected practitioner in the county, and said, what's the corporate name? Well, this is the name we're using. So he gave me the name and I thought, okay. So we ran it through the Department of State Corporation Bureau. I'll come back to a problem we're seeing there in a moment on that. Ran it through that and saw that that name was not a corporate name, nor was it a registered fictitious name. So I went back to the lawyer and said, I'm not seeing, I know you exist as an entity, your company exists as an entity, but I'm not seeing this as a registered fictitious name. What is the corporate name you want to use? So he gave me another corporate name of some umbrella organization, but said for marketing purposes, and because this sort of was a marketing agreement, wanted to be able to use this other name they were using routinely, the fictitious name. I said, that's fine, but until you get that registered, we're not using that. We're not going to use that in conjunction with my client's name because we know that's not yet even a registered name. That was in November. He's still trying to get that fictitious name registered, which comes back to what I wanted to say a moment ago. One of my partners, Don Formoso, some of you may know, does a lot of for-profit business organizations. And he has alerted everyone here that for reasons unknown to us, the Department of State Corporation Bureau in Pennsylvania is moving at the speed of molasses, I think, in these days. He is having great difficulty getting anything registered that he's trying to do electronically. He's having great difficulty getting anything registered, new things registered, fictitious name registrations, corporate articles of incorporation, LLCs and LLPs, getting the approval back from Harrisburg. Whether he does it online, whether he mails it in. So bear that in mind if you want to make any changes of significance, or if you want to try to register a fictitious name. And what we've now doing is there's a company in Harrisburg that can walk these documents across the street. There's a filing fee. It's not terribly expensive, but it is helpful in getting those documents expedited because for reasons unknown to any of us, again, that department is moving at the speed of a sloth, I guess, at this rate. So just bear that in mind. Okay. You all have your federal tax ID number. That's great. Not a problem. Tax exemption documents. I'm making the assumption that all of you have already filed for 501c3, probably C3 status, maybe one of the other C's, but for tax exempt status with the federal government, and that you all have received the determination letter saying that you are in fact tax exempt. The reason I make that assumption and the reason I'm even bringing this up is because I'm aware of organizations that want to do fundraising and that start doing fundraising before they get that. And that's okay, you can do that. But if you're doing that, you have to tell people that their contributions to you have to tell them in writing, are not tax deductible. And I'm glad I'm seeing some people nodding their heads. They are not tax deductible unless and until you get a determination from the IRS that you have acquired that status. The good news is in Pennsylvania, once you get that determination letter, that works also for Pennsylvania corporate tax. So you don't have to do anything separately with the Commonwealth in order to have tax exempt status for state tax purposes, right? With respect to income tax as a corporation. So again, if you are doing fundraising and you don't yet have that, if you're doing a new organization or you've changed your organization qualitatively and you filed, that's fine, but you just have to tell people that at this point you're not a tax exempt organization. Depending on the nature, of course, of your mission, people will probably contribute anyway, because the benefit of tax deductions for charitable contributions isn't what it was 20 years ago when we file our tax returns. But nonetheless, you have to tell them so that you're not out of compliance. You also, if you haven't, want to file for once you get that determination, now you're tax exempt, you want to file with the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue for a sales and use tax exemption, so that when you buy items, you have a sales tax exempt number you can give to the vendor, so you don't have to pay Pennsylvania sales tax. My church fails to use a sales tax number all the time. I'm the treasurer there. It makes me crazy. They'll buy a big tractor for $3,000. I know that's not a ton of money, but for my little church, the sales tax is significant. And I'll look at them and say, oh my gosh. And then we will go back and try to fix it. But again, much easier to do it up front. Get your Pennsylvania sales tax exemption number, and then make sure appropriate people have it. Sometimes vendors will say to you, give me your sales tax number. We don't want to do that. You don't want your sales tax exemption number to go out to just anybody. You maintain control of that. You maintain control in your organization of who has access to that. You can understand why, for obvious reasons. You want to make sure that there is no misuse of your sales tax exempt number. To the extent any of you are lucky enough to own real estate, I don't know whether this is the case with the folks I'm speaking to, but I do know, since I represent taxing bodies, that a lot of people believe that if they are a charitable organization, a tax exempt organization, that automatically the real estate that they own is real estate tax exempt. That is not the case. If you own real estate, or if you're the one paying the taxes through a lease, and I'll come back to that in a minute, of real estate in which you're operating, right? The entity you're operating, you have to specifically file tax exemption form with the Tax Claim Bureau here in Washington County, right? On the 5th floor of my building, Crossroads Commons, right downstairs. And it will not be retroactive. So if you haven't done this before, do it for next year. File it. And what you will have to demonstrate is that you are in fact a purely public charity. That it's a different standard than the standard used by the IRS, but it's similar. You'll be demonstrating that you're a purely public charity, and the services you're providing essentially relieve the government of part of the burden it would have to provide. So if you're a social service agency and you're providing services that if not provided by you, the county would provide, then you have a good argument for for tax exempt status. If, however, you happen to be fortunate enough to have a donor donate property to you as an income stream, let's say some wonderful benefactor donated to you an apartment building, right? And so somebody else is managing it, but somehow you're getting the revenues of it. You're not, unless it's Section 8 housing, which it wouldn't be, that wouldn't be allowed to be donated. You're not relieving the government of part of its burden. In fact, you're competing with other commercial real estate companies out there. So that is certainly for profit. That is certainly not going to be something that, with respect to that property, would allow you tax exempt status. So my thought is, think about that. If you're leasing property, depending on the nature of your lease, usually and again, it depends on, frankly, how many hairs the school district, or depending which one it is, and since I represent some, I'll be careful here, or the tax claim, or the Washington County Tax Assessment Office, how many hairs they'll split in terms of whether or not, since you're not the actual owner, You're just the user, you're the tenant of the property, whether or not there's going to be tax exempt status for the owner, because the owner, of course, is leasing it to you, right? It depends. It will depend. Again, sometimes taxing bodies, school districts at least, do not challenge tax exempt status requests of entities such as yourselves, just because of the good services provided by the organizations on this call. Sometimes they do. As dollars become less scarce for all school districts, I believe they probably are going to look at each tax exempt request rather carefully to see whether they're going to want to dispute them, or at least go to a hearing to see if the information is there that supports tax exempt status. So, but bear that in mind. If you can get yourself out from under real estate tax, that's a savings to you. Even if it's the case under your lease, you're paying the real estate taxes, or if the owner of the property, if it's a lease, is paying the real estate taxes. Perhaps if you can get out from under the real estate taxes, you can get your rental payments down, save yourself some money. Okay. I've referenced, of course, you are, as a charitable organization, required to register with Pennsylvania. So make sure you've done that. More importantly, make sure you renew your registration every year. That can be done online. Sometimes you have to have audits done. Sometimes you don't, depending on your gross revenues. They'll tell you that. Just make sure you're looking into that and making sure those ducks are all lined up and in a row as well. Irs Form 990 is the tax return for an organization such as yourself. That form will suffice also for state income tax purposes, right? It's just a document you have to file every year. You're not going to pay any, if you're tax exempt, so you're not going to pay any taxes. It's just a reporting requirement. So you have to keep going with that. Okay. All right. Now let's talk about policies. This probably is, you have a lot more discretion here, and this is probably tied more to, from my perspective, to making yourself attractive to agencies from whom you want to get funding. So there are a number of policies I think you always should have. You certainly need a conflicts of interest policy. You need to make sure that your board members understand that their priority is to your organization. And this happens to me all the time with the WCCF, and if there's a conflict, the board member identifies the conflict and doesn't participate in the decision-making. I will never be on the allocation committee. The WCCF, as you well know, has a lot of different committees, and the allocation committee is probably the one of most interest to most of you. I will never be on that committee because I have many clients, some of whom are in this call, who are funded by the WCCF. So every board meeting, when we are approving allocations as recommended by our allocations committee, we get the list ahead of time, and Alicia and Betsy will laugh because I'll send them an email and say, okay, here, I'm voting yes for everything except these, because it's always a whole list. It's all the school districts. It's a lot of organizations that my firm has worked with, and that's it. It's not just me. It's my firm has worked with, because for purposes of this, for a conflict of interest, Peacock, Keller, and Barb Graham are the same here. So you
I think you hold the record for most conflict of interest right now at this point.
Well, perhaps, and that, I guess that's good, because that means to me my clients are getting money from the WCCF. So those of you on the line, good for you. Again, you need to make sure that people understand this. And later I reference in servicing. Make sure that your board members understand what this means. It's not a bad idea with respect to all these policies to require your board members to sign off on them every year. Certainly every time a board member comes on, you make them sign off that they've received it, they've understood it, and they've had the opportunity, how legalese can we be? They've had the opportunity to ask questions about it if they like to. But really, it's not a bad idea with newer folks coming on. If you have the time, they have the time, and you can do it. And again, with Zoom meetings, I think it makes it much easier to just have the discussion with them, have an in-service with them about these things. Ethics is the same way. Those are similar, but not quite the same, because conflicts of interest are usually a specific issue. Ethics is more akin to things like I don't share information about what the allocation committee is recommending until after the board votes. And even then, I don't share it because I'm not the one to be sharing that information. I don't share the confidential discussions. I'm on the personnel committee about the personnel issues we're considering, things like that. Ethics, for all of you on this phone, it's common sense ethics, right? But it's, again, making sure that we honor the mission of the organization. We don't act in any way that would impugn the integrity of the organization. We certainly don't speak ill of the organization. If we have a disagreement, the disagreement stays in-house, those sorts of things. It kind of is similar to, these are all sort of related to confidentiality, of course, and our social media use policy. I think I'm a dinosaur. You know, I'm old. You heard when I graduated. I tell you what, if I had 5 things I could eliminate tomorrow, social media would be among the 5, only because I think it has a great value unless misused, and I think it's misused all the time. So my recommendation is always that your organization have a social media use policy that says something like, there is a person in the organization who is the one who communicates to the rest of the world about your organization, whether that's via any kind of PR matters, any kind of social media. That person is the point person. I am not on social media, but I guarantee you if I was on social media, I would never be saying anything about the Washington County Community Foundation, because that's not my role. And that is part of my responsibility, because our policy says all the social media marketing efforts, all those come through the organization, not the members of the Board of Trustees. Okay. Similarly, and this gets a little bit more difficult, you want to think about a social media use policy with your employees. Again, employees have First Amendment rights until they don't. Everybody thinks they can say anything on anywhere, anytime they want, and if it's not pornography, if it's not obscene, if it's not yelling fire in a theater, and it's not defaming something, there's nothing wrong with it. That's not true. That's not true. The First Amendment is more limited than people suggest. I think, again, if you think you're going to have a problem, or if you want to, or frankly, better to head it off at the pass by having a social media policy for your employees ahead of time about the organization, right? About the organization. And it's not just your board members in terms of what they say about the organization. It's also about what your employees say. It's the same kind of policy. All right. Policies on board member responsibilities. I mean, board members, our responsibility first and foremost is a fiduciary one. We are obligated to act in the best interests of the organization, or at least not to act in a manner that is to the detriment of the organization. Even if we don't affirmatively act to benefit the organization, we certainly cannot act in a manner that is detrimental to the organization. If we're going to do that, get off the board. We shouldn't be on the board. What that means is, in addition, we have an obligation to be present, meaning to attend board meetings. Harken back to your bylaws. How many meetings are you going to have? How many committees are you going to have, depending on the size of your organization, and what are those committees? Is there going to be an issue or sanction for, and that's maybe too strong of a word, for those members who can't attend? Is it just going to be they're going to be asked to leave? Is it going to be that they're going to be asked not to be in that committee? What is that? Again, you don't have to write the sanctions into the policies. You just have to make sure you're monitoring who's paying attention or who's participating. And I say this as an individual who, because of life circumstances, missed a couple of my own WCCF meetings last year, which I feel badly about. But it's understood why I was not there. They were just life circumstances. So participation, of course, is critical. You can't be a good, valuable board member if you're not participating. It's part of the time and the duty of care that we owe. Our duty of care, our financial responsibility, our fiduciary responsibility is a duty of care and a duty of loyalty and a duty of confidentiality, as I mentioned. And also, this one is clearly up to you, but do your members, or do you want to have a policy? This is up to you. Do you want to have a policy that requires your members to make some annual contribution of value to the organization. You may not want to have a policy that does that. You may want to have sort of like an unwritten protocol. And again, I'm not necessarily talking about money, because not everybody has the wherewithal in any given year to donate whatever amount of money you might come up with. You may say just make some financial contribution. I feel like I'm doing an NPR commercial here, but is it $5 or is it $500? I mean, just make a contribution. You'll harken back. You'll remember from the Day of Giving, I believe it was, the WCCF encourages every member of every board. So we have to donate just a little bit so we get 100% participation, so you could get more money from the WCCF. Again, the funding agencies are looking how involved, how committed are the members of your organizations. And again, it also doesn't have to be money. It could be donations in kind in terms of services. You have probably selected certain individuals for your boards based on their interest in whatever your mission statement is, but also based on their skill set, right? There is nothing wrong with calling upon those individuals to assist you by using their skill set for the benefit of the organization at no cost to the organization. That's a donation of their time, and that is certainly probably at least as valuable perhaps to you as perhaps money might be. Okay. Hopefully you won't need it, but probably want to have a whistleblower policy just to be on the safe side. We can help you with those sorts of things. And I say that just because there are some larger scale organizations who have run into difficulty with individuals. And again, if there's a whistleblower situation, you want to make sure that your organization has had a process in place. Or I should say, if there's an issue with the organization, you want to make sure that your organization has had a process in place to allow somebody who has a concern to appropriately express that concern, so that if something happens, you can say, wait a second, we provided the outlet, we provided the procedure that he or she could follow, and avoid a whistleblower claim. Do not want those if we can avoid them. Obviously, again, I think this is something most funding agencies are going to want. You're going to want non-discrimination policies, non-harassment policies for your employees. Recognize also that those policies under the law apply to independent contractors as well. So if you get a complaint from someone that an independent contractor whom you've engaged to provide services for you has acted inappropriately towards somebody, a staff member, another individual, the fact that the alleged transgressor is an independent contractor does not take you out of the concern that you have. So make sure you have those kind of policies in place that address those persons as well. Okay, let's talk about some operational issues, just really basic things. These are the things I was talking about before that I think are common sense things that people forget. Again, I really recommend that you step back and on some sort of regular basis, review your documents to see whether changes need to be made, whether they're just updating them, whether you're revising them, whether you're qualitatively changing them, or just adding to them. Again, depends on the size of your organization. If you have the wherewithal and are large enough, I really do recommend, this is the best practice, that you have an audit, an annual independent audit done, regardless of whether you're required to do it by a granting agency, by the Commonwealth, because again, that's gonna, if you can afford it, and generally you can find folks in this county who are reasonable in terms of the fees they're charged. But remember, this is an independent audit. So if you have an auditor on your board, that individual is not doing the audit because he or she is not independent. You want an outsider to come in and make recommendations if need be, make sure everything's copacetic. So you have this nice audit report should anybody come looking, and should you go looking for funding from any organization. There are so many organizations that provide funding to smaller agencies, larger foundations, not just us, of course, but larger foundations, and they'll want that annual audit, and they'll want a history of that if you can get it. As I said, you really want to in service or train your board members. But my current pet peeve though is I have to say is about meetings. Okay, so you schedule meetings, you provide as much notice as you can, so as many people can participate. You provide a detailed agenda. The emphasis there is detailed. I have been at meetings where the agenda every quarterly meeting, and Dink, this is not our meeting, but the quarterly meeting has the same agenda. Approve the minutes, approve any new board members if necessary, new business, there'll be maybe any new business, old business, anything else. That agenda is not helpful. It certainly doesn't encourage anybody to think ahead of time and plan ahead of time. It doesn't give your board members information that they're going to need to rely upon when they come to this meeting and have to vote. And it will be extremely difficult to get appropriate minutes going forward. What do I mean by that? I firmly believe, I'm a big believer that the agenda should be as complete as possible in terms of having the motions that you want approved. Now, there can be discussion items. You don't have to be voting on everything, but the discussion item should be, discussion item on relocating to a different facility. You can have that discussion item, but if you're approving an audit report, if you're approving expenditures, whatever you're approving, it should be as detailed as possible. You can have attachments. The attachments should be referenced in the agenda. Your attachment could be your list of bills to be paid, or for us, allocations or things like that. It allows first of all, it allows the meetings to go much more smoothly, much more quickly. And that generally means you're going to have that greater participation over time, because people are not going to view this as a meeting that lasts 3 hours and all we do is talk and don't get anywhere. In addition, it allows you to prepare appropriate minutes. I should be able, remember I said at the beginning, I should be able to step back and look at your bylaws and look at your minutes and look at your documents and know what's been going on, right? And that, frankly, is what an auditor is going to do as well. They're going to look at your records. I have seen minutes that are written either 50 pages long because they're verbatim minutes of everything that was said, which is not the purpose, by the way, of course, of minutes at a meeting, or minutes that are 3 lines that tell us absolutely nothing. You don't have to have anything in the minutes other than when it started, when it ended, who was present, and that includes staff people who was present, and the actions that were voted on and how the vote went. You don't have to list all your board members' names. If everybody voted, you can say unanimous. You can say, if you have 9 board members, you could say the vote was 8-1, and then you just list the person who voted against, or if it's 8-0-1, the person who abstained. That's all you need. You don't need anything more than that, because once you list the people present, it's clear what's going on. You're able to tell from the minutes. I have seen, however, minutes that will say to expedite a situation on mundane business. For example, things that are non-controversial, like approving the minutes from the last meeting, or a couple items to approve some volunteers, all the clearances are in order, everything's good, and there'll be a list of volunteers. And the motion will be motion to approve the following volunteers, A, B, C, D, and they'll have the individuals' names. I've seen minutes, people will say, okay, I move items under the volunteer approval, I move items A through D. Motion, second, vote. Okay. I've seen minutes that say motion to approve items A through D, and then the vote. And the minutes don't attach anything. So you have no idea. And you think, I see Lisa's laughing there. I mean, I've seen this in people who have been doing minutes for years, who just really didn't think about it. And mind you, the agenda is not attached to the minutes. Now, I don't even think the agenda attached to the minutes, that's okay. But again, people shouldn't have to work looking at your minutes. They shouldn't have to look at your minutes and then have to go to the attachments and see what's going on for something that detailed. Certainly, a financial report that has a whole lot of financial information, that's an attachment, motion to approve the financial report. You don't need to put that in the text of the minutes. But something like this, what are we vote on items 2 through D? What is it? That's why it's much easier if you have an agenda that has that ahead of time. It allows whoever is recording the recording secretary, whoever's preparing the minutes, to just take that motion, put it in the minutes, copy and paste it into the minutes and put the vote. Okay. Very, very much, much easier, and it's accurate. The other reason for having detailed agendas ahead of time is if I go back to my meeting where, okay, old business, new business, people are making motions from the floor. Everybody's changing them. Somebody writes it down. Perhaps somebody's audio recording it. It gets in there. If you're not meeting for another quarter or for another month, and you don't see those minutes till the next day, the likelihood of folks' recollection being accurate in terms of what it was they voted on and what exactly the motion was is really slim. You want to have it written. If the written motion gets changed at the meeting, that's perfectly fine, but at least everybody has the written motion in front of them and they can all mark it up and change it, and it can be put the next day. It just makes for much better record keeping. And again, it's all about making sure we're doing things in a defensible manner, doing things in a way that people understand what we're doing, which of course is defensible, and also makes us as transparent as possible, both from a legal perspective and also because of those folks from whom we want to obtain money. Okay. Do your bylaws allow proxies? If they don't do proxies. Do your bylaws allow for action to be taken by email? I mean, votes by email? Probably not. Do not recommend that, because again, that's a record keeping nightmare, right? Because then you have to have whomever is your record keeper has to be attaching those emails. And what is happening possibly is you're getting personal information in there. Whether or not anybody looking at your minutes should see my personal email address is my call, not yours. And so if I'm going to allow action to be taken by emails in order to keep a record, I'm going to print out that email, and that email is going to have my personal email address. Right? You will have some board members that don't want their personal email addresses out there for the whole world. And most organizations, I think, of this nature do not have. I don't have a WCCF email address. I don't need one. I don't want one. The staff have them, but the board of trustees does not need them. We don't need them. Bigger organizations will have them, but I would bet that most of the organizations on this call do not provide email addresses to their board members for their organization. I would bet that if your board members are communicating with you by email, they're communicating with you using their personal email addresses. I will also tell you my experience that even if you assign an organization email, most people won't use those anyway. It's small. Okay. Any questions at this point? Okay. Let's talk then about what can we do to make sure our board members better understand what they can do for us, meaning how they can help the organization survive. Are there ways that you can communicate with your board members so that they feel that much more a part of the organization? I belong to several organizations, some of which I feel like family with, some of which sometimes I wonder why I'm still with the organization. I just go because generally other people don't show up and they need a quorum. We have to find ways, as I think every nonprofit that wants to survive, wants to function appropriately, has to find ways to make sure that its board of directors is emotionally invested and willing to spend the time commitment it takes to make the organization succeed. I think, as I said, I think these kinds of things help a lot. I think you're doing this type of training and involving your board members. I think asking them for their input on what kind of additional trainings they might need, might want, might feel comfortable with, asking them when they're asked to join your organization or when they come to your organization, having conversations with them about, and having whomever, the executive director, whomever your organization is, who's kind of in control of it, asking them the committees on which they want to participate, asking them where they think their skill sets are, what they think they could do to contribute, constructive ways they could improve your organization. My experience has been that when asked, if given an opportunity to think about it, most people have a lot of good ideas. Sometimes they're not asked because sometimes the organization believes it's running well enough, and it may be running well enough that it doesn't need to ask. But again, I think that's one of the ways that we can all try to get our board members more invested in our organization. There are people, we all know this, there are people that are much more outgoing than others. You will observe among your board members those who are more outspoken, those who are not. I think perhaps way too early, I got a reputation on our board for being a little bit too outspoken, but that's okay. That's okay, Alicia. I understand that. Dink knows that too. I understand that. But then there are other people that, unlike myself, who probably ponder a little bit longer and then come up with probably the most impact, and I hate this word, but I'm going to use it anyway, the most impactful comments. We just have to find a way to make sure all of them feel comfortable and feel involved. And so I look to you folks for any recommendations you have or any ideas you come up with on how we can do that.
Barb, you're not too outspoken. I'll go on the record and say that.
Oh, well, thank you. Of course you'd say that, because why wouldn't she? Okay. The other thing I think every organization needs, and this is, again, if I'm a funding organization, you need, and some newer, younger, more struggling organizations probably aren't able to do this, but you need to be thinking in this way, even if you can't yet implement them, is you really do need kind of a long-range plan. You need to know, where do we want to be? You need to think about, where do we want to be, say 5 years from now, in terms of our revenue stream, perhaps in terms of the number of people or the geographic area in the community that we serve. Because again, having a target is something to shoot for. You have to have the target. If you don't have the target, you don't know what you're heading for. And when you're out there fundraising, or when you're out there going out to other organizations asking for assistance, you're not going to necessarily be successful if you can't tell people, look, here's where we are now, this is where we'd like to be. Again, we're talking goals. Whether you get there or not is another matter, but we're talking about goals in terms of what you should strive for. We have a question.
We do. So this is from Lisa Hannum at Domestic Violence Services. Firstly, Barb, one of the first things you said was that we need to notify of officer changes annually. To what entity do they need to notify?
Sure. There's a form. It's the organization, it's the Corporation Bureau. It's the form, an annual statement, nonprofit corporation, the form number, and I pulled this off the internet today because I wanted to make sure my number was still correct. Form number DSCB, meaning Bureau of Corporations and Charitable Organizations, 15-15110. It's a very simple form. It just says you're just putting, and there's no fee for this, by the way. That's a good news. This annual document. You just put in the name of the corporation, your principal office, and the persons who are the principal officers, and then it doesn't even have to be notarized. You have the name of the corporation and the person who's signing off on it. But just make sure you file this. I believe the annual, I know this is to be done annually, and I think that's the date is probably tied into when you registered yourself. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the instructions. On or before April 30th of each year, you do this, okay? This is different than if you're changing your registered office for purposes of the Corporation Bureau. You'll see in the instructions for filing this document that it gives you a different, of course, because it's a bureaucracy, it gives you a different form to fill in if you're changing your registered office, okay?
Barb, can you repeat that form number one more time?
Sure. D as in dog, DSCB 15-5110. Okay.
And I just put that in the chat as well, if anyone would
Thank
like
you.
to copy paste.
Thank you. Like, as I said, no filing fee, one of the good things. Yay.
Another question we had, this is from Kelly Swift. At the beginning of the session, you mentioned re-registration being required annually of articles of incorporation. What is that process called? Is there a form for re-registration?
Okay, if I said it that way, I misspoke. That is what I'm talking about. You're not registering your articles of incorporation. It's your annual statement of the nonprofit corporation. Okay, that's the same form we just referenced, the DSCB 15-5110. Okay. So that keeps you copacetic with Harrisburg. And
Sarah Schumacher just dropped the link in the chat if anybody wants to go directly to that form. Thanks, Sarah.
And recognize, the Charitable Bureau police are not coming after you if you don't file it. But the problem is, if you go a very long time and don't do this, and there's ever a review, these are the ways you lose your charitable status. You don't want to lose your charitable status, of course. You don't want to lose your tax exempt status. You don't want to run a file because then your charity goes away. Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Barb, I have a question for you, and it's about meetings. So, people who maybe haven't sat on a board before, or maybe it's a new organization and they formed a board from people who haven't sat on a board before, and they have to have these meetings. What resources or what tips can you give them to ensure that they're holding a proper meeting, not just to get together?
Okay. Well, I think you want to have an orderly meeting, right? So I think you want to set up ahead of time, like a kind of a normal course. And when I was talking about the 5 items, I was being a bit facetious, but there will be a structure to your meetings. You'll have a call to order and a roll call, and then you'll start going through items. And if you want to do financial matters or personnel matters, just whatever categories. So you get up your structure and your agenda. And I really do recommend that you try to follow something akin to Robert's Rules of Order, meaning, and you can get a Robert's Rules of Order, they're probably online now on your Kindle, but you can easily get a copy. There's also an Odell Parker, same sort of thing. Basic rules of parliamentary procedure, meaning, a motion and a second on anything you want to act on, and then discussion before the vote, right? Anybody can abstain. A lot of times you certainly abstain if you have a conflict of interest, and you notify the chair of the conflict, or you do it the way I do ahead of time, which is notifying the CEO and the CFO ahead of time. Recognizing that abstentions, it's weird, abstentions count with the prevailing side. So that's just a weird kind of thing. Go figure, under Robert's rules. And once you have the discussion, then you vote, right? You can, again, I don't want to get hyper technical with Robert's rules. You can amend motions. A lot of times at my client meetings, there'll be an amendment to add, for example, a simple thing, like we accept the resignation of Barb. And then somebody said, motion second, somebody says, can we add with regret to that? Now, I don't want to do a motion to amend. Usually what we just say was something simple like that. Okay with the maker of the motion, okay with the second, fine. You just add it in. If you're going to do a substantive amendment, really changing it, a lot of times I say vote it down and just make a new motion. You do not want negative motions because they're confusing. I want a motion not to hire somebody. Because then if you vote no, you're voting no to not to hire. but you're not really voting to hire. It's confusing to people. So what I always tell people, if there's a motion to hire and you don't want to hire the person, vote no, and then the motion fails. The motion will also fail for lack of a second. Any motion fails for lack of a second under Robert's rules. Very basic things. And if we ever wanted to do just a basic meeting protocol, we could certainly do that. Not a bad idea. Might be cumbersome, but actually not that difficult to have a policy that shows how your meetings are going to be run. One of the things that you have to decide is who sets the meeting agenda. For example, in most school districts, it will be the superintendent and the board president or board secretary, right? At WCCF, we have our committees make recommendations. Those all go to Betsy and Alicia. They put the agenda together. That's how we've set it up. So depending on the size of your organization, and I do recognize that there are some smaller organizations here, you just go with that kind of logical common sense. And once you set that up, you use the sort of same format, because then board members get used to it. People get used to it. If you're going to have reports, the personnel committee is going to make a report and its recommendations. Because we're not public entities, we don't have to worry about the Sunshine Act. Everything we do is private. Our minutes reflect how we voted, but everything else stays confidential within the confines of the meeting room. So you can discuss personnel things rather freely, which we wouldn't be able to do in the same manner if we were subject to the Sunshine Act. But we're not. That's the good news. I think that would be kind of my recommendation. Go ahead.
Thank you. One quick question before we wrap things up here from Nikki Sarchett at Heritage Library. If we cannot locate our articles of incorporation, is there somewhere where we can get them?
Yes. Corporation Bureau. Nikki, if you're having trouble getting online to get them, because this is how it works. In the old days, when I could easily check a name at the Corporation Bureau, I'd find the name, I'd find a number assigned to it at the time those articles were filed, and then it would say to me, do you want to order them? You pay a fee and you can order them. But Nikki, if you're having trouble getting to them, let me know, and I'll get my handy dandy partner to help us get you a copy of your articles. Nikki, how old is your organization?
I believe we were incorporated in 1998, but the library started in 1908. So it's anywhere in between there. I've been the director a little over a year and a half, but I haven't been able to apply for certain things because I don't have those original forms in hand.
Okay. Again, we can see if we can get them for you from the Corporation Bureau. The other thing I will tell everybody is usually, I don't have one in here, but just give me a minute. Usually, whenever a corporation is set up by whoever set up the corporation, they order, this is not one, but they order a minute book, right? And it'll have on the spine your organization's name, and in it will have the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, and the incorporation minutes and everything else that's supposed to be in there, right? If it's a profit corporation, they'll have stock shares if there are stocks going to be issued, things like that. And I say this because who knows, Nikki, there might be a binder, especially in the library, it could easily be there and you might think it's a book. There could be a binder that is in fact the minute book that has your articles of incorporation in it somewhere. But again, if you can't find it, email me and I'll have my one of my partners see what we can find for you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Great questions, everybody. Well, we're at 1 o'clock, so we're going to have to wrap things up. But special thanks to Barb, giving us a lot to think about. I think that was a really informative session. We're grateful.
You're welcome.
Content will be shared and the recording will be posted to the WCCF website. Just go to For Grant Seekers and go to the nonprofit resources page, and then save the date for next month's session, Tuesday, April 11th. It's the importance of a good online presence, featuring our friends at Tungsten Creative Group. So look for an e-blast on that in the coming weeks. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.